Okay, class, we are now looking at the male reproductive system with concentration on physiology. Okay. So the testes have, as we talked about before in our anatomy section, seminiferous tubules. This is where spermatogenesis occurs. In the seminiferous tubules, you have nerve cells called Sertoli cells, and you have the gametogenic cells. So you have gametogenic and non-gametogenic. The gametogenic produce the sperm, the non-gametogenic would be the Sertoli cells. The Sertoli cells have FSH receptors, and FSH influences spermatogenesis. It does not cause it, but it influences because testosterone is highly important. Without FSH, you still could do spermatogenesis, but not to the same efficacy. You also have interstitial cells, known as the interstitial cells of Leydig, and they make the testosterone. On the interstitial cells, you have the LH receptors. So the LH receptors are on those cells, and that's what causes the production of the testosterone. Okay? Here's the testes again, which we've seen before, previous. LH secretion is controlled by rise in testosterone through the negative feedback. So in other words, testosterone produced by the interstitial cells, as it rises and gets into the bloodstream, obviously, then it can cause inhibition, negative feedback at the anterior pituitary and at the hypothalamus with the gonadotropin releasing hormone. FSH secretion is controlled also to some extent by testosterone, but a major factor of its inhibition is really inhibin, which is produced by the Sertoli cells. Okay? Here is an example. Let's look at this. Hypothalamus releases, as we've talked about, gonadotropin releasing hormones. That goes to the anterior pituitary, and the cells in the anterior pituitary, known as the gonadotrophs, can produce FSH and LH. FSH will go to the seminiferous tubules, which we said receptors are on the Sertoli cells, and the Sertoli cells can also inhibit it by secreting inhibin, which increases FSH at the anterior pituitary. Okay, LH goes to the interstitial cells of Leydig. Those are the cells that produce testosterone. Testosterone has an inhibiting effect on the anterior pituitary cells that produce LH, and also on the hypothalamus cells, hypothalamus neurons, shall I say, that produce the gonadotropin releasing hormone. So it's a negative feedback, as you see. Testosterone derivatives in the brain. Okay, here's the situation. Masculinization of the brain actually involves not only testosterone, but it also involves some estradiol, estrogen. So estrogen is important in the development of the male. I'm a male. Okay. It's not directly necessarily testosterone. Testosterone produced by the interstitial cells again. In certain cells, you have an enzyme called 5-alpha reductase. 5-alpha reductase can convert, that enzyme can convert testosterone to dihydrotestosterone. And that seems to be the one that's more involved in this brain development and other things. Okay, there's another enzyme that can take testosterone and convert it to an estrogen known as 17-beta estradiol. And that enzyme is called aromatase. Okay, estradiol inhibits LH secretion, somewhat like it did in the female, and male and female brains. They are different, but they still have similarities, and they do require both androgens and male hormones. Androgens and female hormones in the development. Right here is showing testosterone with the 5-alpha reductase making dihydrotestosterone. There are other enzymes that can make some other things, dihydroepiandrostenedione and androstenedione, and also here's the aromatase making the estradiol, 17-beta estradiol that we spoke about. Okay. Testosterone secretion and age. Okay. Testosterone secretion will start to decrease in the male around the time of the 20s, and it will progressively decrease. Now, by the time the person is 70, it's pretty much down to the same level of androgens in a female. Okay? Now, things that can expedite its decrease would be physical inactivity, not exercising, not getting much physical, obesity, and certain drugs can do that. Testosterone, again, once it reduces, some of the male secondary characteristics and even primary characteristics start kind of going away. Okay, let's go a little further here in this physiology. Okay, so the androgens, also called the anabolic steroids, because they build muscle. You hear about those, in athletes and illegal activity. Estradiol is secreted by Sertoli cells, Leydig cells, and developing sperm. Okay, it's actually secreted after the conversion of testosterone through the aromatase enzyme in these, and there's a lot discussed and not somewhat known about this, but the importance in many cases is not fully understood as far as how the female hormone involves and causes changes in the male. But anyway, receptors for estradiol on Sertoli cells, Leydig cells, cells line the ducts and accessory glands to assist in that development. Okay, role in spermatogenesis, that's new. Okay, so it is not fully understood how the female hormone affects everything, but we do find that there is some activity when you look at it in certain experiments and decrease it or take it away. Here again is the action of androgens in males, a little short there. Okay, we'll go a little further. Go a little further here. Okay. Here again, anterior pituitary produces FSH, LH from the gonadotropes, seminiferous tubules. In the seminiferous tubules, remember, FSH only works on the Sertoli cells. The Sertoli cells within the seminiferous tubules do the spermatogenesis, but the Sertoli cells, which have the FSH receptors, also do the 5-alpha reductase. Remember that 5-alpha reductase changes the testosterone to the dihydrotestosterone, and then we have estradiol, then we have inhibins. But all of these here feed back also, we think, on the interstitial cells. So this is somewhat of a controversial, because you can see the question marks, but there is some indication. We even find that interstitial cells may produce things, adrenocorticotropic hormone, melanocyte stimulator hormone, the beta endorphins, and so forth, that would be primarily produced by the anterior pituitary. But again, we will have to think about that. There's a big molecule you may have heard of in the endocrine section called pro-opiomelanocortin. That's a big molecule that's produced in the cells that will be called the corticotropic cells in the anterior pituitary, and produce these things: ACTH, melanocyte stimulating hormone, and beta endorphins, so forth. Okay, germ cells from the yolk sac migrate. All right, now what will happen is about 1,000 to 2,000. We'll put it here, about 1,000 to 2,000 germ cells from the yolk sac migrate to the testes. These are the ones that are going to need to multiply and so forth in order to produce the sperm. These particular germ cells, germination cells, will ultimately have to do a lot of mitosis, because you will be producing, the male will be producing millions of sperm throughout his life. This is where you get into meiosis again and study that, because the diploid 2N 46 chromosome spermatogonia That's what the germ cells initially turn into once they get there. The spermatogonia go through mitosis, increase the number of cells, then the daughter cell occurs, and so forth. So I want you to go back to this slide on your own, but I'm going to go to this one to kind of further explain. All right, so here would be a spermatogonia that has come in from the yolk sac into the developing testes. What will happen is that this particular cell has got to undergo mitosis, exact duplication. One cell, two will be produced, this one and this one. This one here is going to stay behind. And all of this is occurring. Here's the seminiferous tubule at the base down here, next to the basement membrane. The one that's the selectee to undergo meiosis, we're going to change the name to primary spermatocyte from spermatogonia. Then what will happen is this particular cell, this is meiosis, will undergo the first meiotic division, which gives me two cells with half the number of genetic material. Now, that's what meiosis is going to come in, because technically it has enough for two cells. It's two in, but the genetic material at the chromosome is hooked by the centromere. But again, something to study on. Then what will happen is you'll undergo the second meiotic division. Once it undergoes the second meiotic division, then it becomes a spermatid. All of this is happening in the seminiferous tubule. These are moving up from here, where the gonia, up progressively towards the lumen. Then once you get the spermatids, then within the seminiferous tubule, you will go from spermatogenesis, which is this, into spermiogenesis. Spermiogenesis is to actually form the sperm from the spermatids. And the first one is called the spermatozoon. The spermatozoon. Now, right here, these cells these two are going to be held together, and these two are going to be held together. And this is going to be in the seminiferous tubule. And as these cells split apart, that's when they do this. Now, what's going to help them split apart are going to be the Sertoli cells. So the Sertoli cells, because these cells here are being invested by the Sertoli cells. So here's the Sertoli cell. It's a columnar cell. And all of these are surrounded by the cytoplasm of the Sertoli cell. And the Sertoli cells have tight junctions hooking one to the other as we look at it. So I'm going to come back. Okay, so I'm going into spermiogenesis from this. One of the things that has to happen, we have to condense the nuclear material. That is going to be due to a protein called protamine that will replace histone in these. Now, histone, if you go back to mitosis and meiosis, histones are nuclear proteins that the chromatin is that the chromatin wraps around to form the chromatin from the basic DNA ladder. And again, something to study on. That's one thing. So condensing. The other thing is, going from here, I need to develop the flagella. Okay, that's another thing that needs to happen. The other thing that needs to happen in spermiogenesis is to put a cap on this, known as the acrosome. The acrosome is a cap, and it's an enzyme aspect that must be placed, and that's what's going to help break down the surrounding aspect of the secreted egg. So those are the things that's got to occur in here. Okay, which is got to break through something called the corona radiata and the zona pellucida. But again, we'll have to get into the female aspect to do that. Okay. So once you have finished all of this and finished spermiogenesis, then you've reached this lumen, and by the time you reach the lumen and you've completed all of this, that's when everything can happen. Now, the next thing I need to do, but I'm going to close this one out, is to discuss the Sertoli cells aspect on the immune, because these are new cells, so we're going to start here.